So if you haven't heard, the news came out the other day that there's going to be a new Friday the 13th series coming to Peacock. I wanted to make a video just to talk about this upcoming series, what we know about it so far, my personal thoughts on it, and what I'd like to see and what I don't want to see from this series. So let's start with the basics. We haven't seen Jason Voorhees in a film since the Friday the 13th remake, which came out way back in 2009. Since then, we've had a trilogy of Halloween films, a few Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, we've had two Chucky films, a remake, and a series, but no Jason Voorhees. At first because they couldn't figure out what direction they wanted to go with the franchise, and later because the rights have been tied up in a legal battle between Friday the 13th creators Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller. But then all of a sudden, out of the blue, we get this headline. Peacock announces Friday the 13th prequel series, Crystal Lake. So when I first saw this headline, I'll admit, I had some mixed feelings about it. On one hand, I was excited that we were finally getting something Friday the 13th related after all these years. But a prequel series? Let me just say, horror prequels suck. I wasn't a fan when Rob Zombie gave Michael Myers a cliched abusive family backstory. I didn't need to see Freddy's Dead giving Freddy a cliched abusive family backstory. And don't even get me started on that 2017 Leatherface movie, trying to act like this handsome bastard becomes Leatherface. Get the fuck out of here. But then I read a little bit more, and the article says, we can tell you that Crystal Lake comes to us from the masters of horror at A24 and visionary creator Bryan Fuller. So a few things to unpack here. First of all is the involvement of Bryan Fuller. For those unfamiliar with him, he created the Hannibal series based on the Hannibal Lecter character. It aired on NBC from 2013 to 2015. And honestly, I thought that series was really freaking good, especially given the constraints he had to work with since it was a broadcast network show. So I'm putting this in the cautiously optimistic category. For me, I'm excited that this project actually has someone talented in charge who has already demonstrated they can adapt an iconic horror character into a series. It's also interesting that A24 is involved with this. That studio has been all over the horror scene the last 10 years. X, Hereditary, The Witch, Midsommar, Saint Maud, Pearl, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. The list goes on. Obviously, Friday the 13th definitely has a very different vibe from those movies, so it'll be interesting to see where they want to take the franchise. But let's get back to Bryan Fuller. After the show was announced, Bryan Fuller gave an interview with Fangoria, revealing more about the project. Fangoria asks, what characters and locations and whatnot are you allowed to use from the Friday the 13th franchise? His response? Everything. We can use everything. We can go to hell. We can go to space. That's not to say we will do those things, although if we do go 10 seasons, I will be lobbying hard to go to space. A24 and Mark Toberoff, who is Victor Miller's lawyer, have beautifully and excruciatingly assembled all of the Friday the 13th rights. As a streaming series, we have the rights to do everything underneath the Friday the 13th umbrella. The movie rights are a completely different thing. They are tied up at New Line and are super messy and probably won't be untangled anytime soon. But we have access to anything and everything that Friday the 13th has done up until this point. So the bad news, yeah, we probably won't be getting a new Jason movie anytime soon. But the good news is we could potentially see those elements in this series. Fangoria continues, this has been pitched as a prequel series. So how far back in the timeline will we be when Crystal Lake begins? I don't think I'm allowed to say just yet, but I would say it's less a prequel series than a pre-remakeul series. Can you describe what pre-remakeul means in this context? For now, no. Not on the record I can't. So I have no idea what the hell he's talking about here, but if I had to guess, I'm thinking this could be a situation where they tell the prequel story of Pamela and young Jason in the past, intercut with flash-forward scenes of grown-up Jason killing in the present day. Sort of like a homicidal This Is Us? Fangoria then brings up another interesting point here. Denoting it as a prequel would tend to indicate that the series will revolve more around Pamela Voorhees than Jason. Will Jason be in it? I wouldn't count Jason out, he says. Could it be that Jason is in it, but he's a kid rather than the masked killer everyone's imagining? I think over the course of the series, you will see many familiar manifestations of Jason. Like maybe Sackhead Jason from Part 2, Hockey Mask Jason, maybe even undead Jason. I'm happy he mentioned familiar versions of Jason because this gives me hope that they will be honoring the franchise's history rather than completely erasing it. Bryan Fuller goes on to talk about his own personal connections with the franchise. I read a detailed plot synopsis for Friday the 13th when I was maybe 9 or 10 in Famous Monsters magazine. This was a few years before I saw the movie. It became a story I'd tell my friends around campfires, which is also where I got my first taste of storytelling and the thrall an audience can fall under when it's hearing a story as captivating as that of Friday the 13th. So there was that, combined with the fact that, at the same time, I was working with special needs kids. I was hyper aware of the challenges of parenting special needs children. One of the kids I sat with during most of that volunteer work, his mother simply couldn't handle him. He was amazing and unique and had a different sort of intelligence, but he was also nonverbal. His mother couldn't get far enough away from him, and so, when I read about Friday the 13th and saw the lengths Pamela Voorhees would go to for her special needs child, I found myself in this Venn diagram of influences, and I fell in love with the series. I fell in love with the first movie, I fell in love with the second movie, I fell in love with all of them. Well, maybe not Jason Goes to Hell, but I'm not mad at it. At any rate, I feel that I'm in a unique space to tell this story, and to make sure it is loved and cared for appropriately. This part gives me the most hope that this show could actually turn out to be really good. He's not just a fan, but he's able to pull on specific story-based reasons from his life for why he is a fan. I also think he pinpoints some things about the Pamela character that I agree with. I want to take a short detour here to talk about something I don't want to see in this prequel, and that is Pamela being portrayed as a crazy, violent psycho before Jason even drowns. There have been several attempts outside the movies to tell Pamela's backstory and sort of fill in some of those details of her life. Specifically, I'm talking about the Pamela's Tale comics and the Pamela tapes from the Friday the 13th game. And I'm not going to pull punches here. I hate both of those takes on the character. So this is something I've been considering making a full video about for a while, but the short version is, both of those stories, I guess you'd call them, offer a backstory for Pamela where she killed her husband Elias years before Jason drowned, and also that she has this history of hearing Jason's voice in her head, even when he's not talking. Hell, even when he was a fetus in the womb, she can hear Jason talking to her. Basically, they're asserting that she was crazy and homicidal long before Jason even drowned. And I hate this idea. For me, the appeal of the whole Pamela story as told in the original film is that it's about grief and loss, and in a strange way, love. Pamela loved Jason more than anything, so much that 20 plus years after his supposed death, she still can't contain the rage over his loss. It's a simple idea that's both tragic and terrifying. The idea that this regular mom could be driven to homicidal madness by losing her only son. But when you start saying that Pam was always crazy, that she was killing people even before Jason drowned, you diminish the entire concept. So I have a lot more to say about this topic, but maybe I'll make a full video about it at some point, because this video is supposed to be about the show. And going back to Bryan Fuller's comments here, when he talks about the lengths Pamela Voorhees would go to for her special needs child, his comments make me think that he gets the character in a way that the writers of those other Pamela stories didn't. Now, having said that, they ask him, how murderous is Crystal Lake gonna be? I'm sure you're not aiming for a particular per-season kill count, but a certain amount of slashing must be on your mind. He says, it will be pretty murderous. I think we'll be dropping bodies every episode, and I think there's something about the build of that, as we are hopefully in for the long haul. Which, look, this could go either way for me. If my guess is right, and this is Jason Voorhees doing all the killing, awesome. I mean, I would love a series with fresh Jason Voorhees kills every episode, right? Now, if it's Pamela doing all the killing, I don't know. I mean, I have a hard time picturing a logical, long-form story with weekly Pam murders and how that could possibly work. So I hope that's not what it's going to be, but I'd still give it a shot to see his take on the story. But let's be real. 99% of the people tuning into this will be expecting to see some sweet Jason Voorhees kills. And I feel like if they don't deliver that to some extent, they should expect backlash from the fan base, much like the Netflix Resident Evil show received. So there's a few other things from this interview I thought were interesting, The Peacock deal is for one guaranteed season, but with a penalty if a second season isn't ordered, which means it's very likely we'll get at least 2 seasons from Peacock. Fuller also notes that he has 3 seasons mapped out already, which is really interesting in terms of the depth of story he's trying to tell here. It's also kind of funny when you consider the movies themselves couldn't even maintain basic story continuity from film to film, and here he has 3 seasons mapped out. He also says they will have a roughly 5 times the per episode budget he had on Hannibal, which is kind of amazing to me considering Hannibal was filled with lavish sets and it just looked expensive. So, what do I want to see from this show? I hope we don't spend a ton of time on the Pamela story before Jason drowns. I'm hoping Jason drowns within the first few episodes. Sorry, buddy. Personally, I would like to see a normal, well-adjusted Pam taking care of Jason for a few episodes. Then, let us watch her unravel after he's gone. Like, what I think would be cool, rather than spending a lot of time filling in unnecessary details of her backstory, I'd rather see how this ordinary woman in the 1950s managed to pull off the Barry and Claudette murders in the first film, or the other ways she tried to sabotage the camp from opening, all while continuing to live in this small, close-knit Crystal Lake community. This character would have to be unhinged, but also capable of hiding her actions from others. Maybe some characters close to her start to suspect her, and she kills them off, making it look like accidents. The idea of this beloved cook who almost everyone in town loves, this poor woman who lost her son, secretly being this killer under everyone's noses, that's interesting to me. There's storytelling potential there if they go that route. And when it comes to Jason, I suppose I wouldn't mind if we got to see some of what happens between his drowning and the adult Jason we see from Friday the 13th Part 2 onward. This kid surviving in the woods all alone, somehow avoiding being detected for all those years. Like, how did he pull this off? What was he up to? If done correctly, I think that story could be interesting. I'm hoping they don't lean too much into the supernatural elements of the series, at least not early on. As much as I love Jason Lives and some of the undead Jason moments, I'm looking forward to revisiting Jason as this human killer mowing down camp counselors. I especially hope they avoid giving Jason some supernatural backstory. Thankfully, Fuller seems to dislike Jason Goes to Hell, which hopefully means he won't use any of that nonsense lore from that film. Sorry if you're a fan of that film, but no. And finally, I hope they get the tone right. I want them to take it seriously, but not too seriously. I want it to be scary, but not some depressingly dark, joyless slog. And I want it to be fun, but please don't make it a total campy cheese fest. The nice part about a reboot, if done well, is that they can lean into the things that worked and avoid the things that didn't. This doesn't always happen, obviously, but sometimes it does, and I hope this will be one of those times. So what do you guys think? What do you want to see out of this show? What don't you want to see? Are you looking forward to this, or are you dreading it? Let me know down in the comments, and until next time, later, Danger Seekers.